Here we go. Coming down in 3, 2, 1. In a world where danger lurks in the shadows, where the line between heroes and villains is blurred, a team of extraordinary individuals is about to embark on a mission that will defy the odds. Meet the Deans, a group of the best in the business, each with a particular set of skills that makes them unstoppable. They may be strangers, but when the world is in peril, they come together as one. Get ready for the ultimate adrenaline rush as they take on the impossible.
Welcome to the Accommodations edition of the Dean Talks that we're calling T for the Fever. Today, we unpack the value in disability. From curb cuts to closed caption, we grow steeped in needs and stir in creative solutions. But what do you do when twice exceptional students meet a knife's edge of underfunded facilities and a spoonful of ableism? You find toxic positivity applied where diagnosis, treatment, tools, and tactics belong. When we have paltry care for what ails, there's T for the fever. The views expressed do not necessarily reflect the views of the hosts or sponsors or Ripe Fruit Foundation. This information is not intended to replace therapeutic or medical advice. This session is being recorded and is streaming live on Facebook. And now let's hear more about our panel from the founder of Ripe Fruit Foundation, Ebony Kinney. Ebony?
Good morning. Yes, I'm so glad to introduce this lively and exciting panel that's timely for this conversation we're going to have today. Let's start with Latina Nicholson. Latina Nicholson of Sora Educational Services has over 20 years of experience in education. She worked with families of children with autism. She's worked with ADHD, children with ADHD, and those with learning disabilities, anxiety, and sensory processing disorder. She holds a master's degree in education, leadership, and political and justice studies with a post-baccalaureate certification in autism spectrum disorders. She's also a proud member of the Master IEP Coach Network and COPA, C-O-P-A-A, and the proud mother of 4 neurodiverse children. Latina, welcome. Okay, then I want to go to Megan Beatty and Kara Rigsby. Megan and Kara are educational leaders, professional development experts, and current educators who have a passion for creating positive change in education, transforming schools into empowering spaces, and students into competent, lifelong learners equipped for success in an ever-evolving world. With more than a decade in the classroom, they have the hands-on experience and knowledge needed for positive impact. Welcome, Megan and Kara.
Good morning. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
And then we're going to go to Colleen Morgan. Colleen lives in San Francisco and is the mother of 2 elementary-age children. Her eldest child is twice exceptional, including profoundly gifted, PDA Autistic Level 1, and ADHD. She'll share her parent perspective on accommodations for her neurodivergent children in various learning environments and their impact on her family. Grateful for her perspective. Colleen, welcome.
Hi, thank you.
And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Steve.
Excellent. My name is Stephen King. I'm the host of the Dean Talks, and information about the Dean Talks can always be found at ripefruit.org, ripefruit.org. Let's open up the discussion this morning with a video snippet to set the stage for the panel to join or react.
There are many differences between an IEP and a 504 plan. The first and most fundamental is they're governed by different laws. An IEP is governed by a special education law. 504 is governed under a civil rights law. Having one of those 13 identified disabilities isn't enough to make sure your child gets an IEP. Whatever is going on with your child, whatever that disability is, also has to affect his performance in the classroom, and that's really important to know. For a 504 plan, a child needs to have a disability that is getting in the way of his learning in the general education classroom. The difference isn't that he needs specialized instruction, it's that he needs some changes to get benefit from his education the same way as other kids in that classroom.
And I have a couple of examples I like to give when I am talking about this in other places, is I wear glasses. I cannot read without glasses. I can see very far if you take my glasses off. Like, I am an anomaly when it comes to wearing glasses, because most people that wear glasses cannot see far away, or they have a difficulty with both. Me, I can see across the street. I can see and read things across at the board. Put a piece of paper in front of me and ask me to read it. Can't tell you what one word on the paper is. No one would ever ask me to read a book without my glasses. In fact, people would say, hey, where are your glasses? You are struggling here. Let's provide this thing so that you can read fluently.
Well, it's a business and a framework within our business that Meg and I created together. We always say, developed by 2 teachers, 4 teachers, because that's the whole intent. With us still being in the classroom, we just wanted to create something that creates more effective instruction for teachers, that creates instruction that kids are excited about. And so that's kind of where it started with her and I. The whole integrated, Meg actually thought of that before we launched it a while back, which is pretty clever.
For students with disabilities, the right accommodations and modifications can be as important to school success as appropriate IEP goals. These educational supports are similar, but they are not the same. Accommodations change how a student accesses information, participates in school activities, or demonstrates their learning. They do not change the curriculum. Modifications, however, change what is being taught or what a student is expected to learn and demonstrate.
Outstanding. Excellent video. Some of our panelists were featured. So let's start by defining accommodations versus modifications. Are there limits to what you can receive a modification for, and what options are available? This question is open to the panel, so panelists, feel free to jump in.
I don't think, as an advocate, that in every place all modifications and or accommodations are necessary. I think sometimes we see children or adults that need these things, and we tend to add more and more and more and more and more, and not necessarily think about which ones are actually helpful in the idea of my glasses. Like, my glasses are the most helpful modification or accommodation that I would get. It would not necessarily be helpful to me to give me Braille or enlarged print or those things, because those are not the things, even if the print is larger, because my disability is reading up close. You can give me larger print and necessarily I still cannot see clearly. So I think we need to think about what ones are effective. And we also need to think about sometimes that there are what I consider natural accommodations, especially in the classroom, that are just good teaching practices that teachers provide that necessarily don't need to be noted in all spaces.
It really kind of sounds like a lot of this is trial and error for some kids in the learning environment. We have to try things and see what works and what doesn't for them. Within this example of modifications, there was a reference that we were given as a group beforehand, and the modifications talked about how to modify the curriculum for children who are falling behind. And from my parent perspective of a child who is an advanced learner, there were really no examples of how we modify the curriculum for kids who need more. And with some of these kids, it's okay and they can get by and they're perfectly happy being at school and socializing. But with some of these other children, like my son, they don't get the modifications that they need for their academics, and it actually ends up affecting their performance behaviorally. And so then they're dysregulated throughout the day. And what we see is if we try a different learning environment and the child is engaged and motivated by what they're learning, that actually we see some of these behavioral challenges reducing.
And I like to just piggyback on that. When we think about, because I too have a twice exceptional child, and in the world today, when children are twice exceptional, the assumption is that they need more work versus more challenging work, or work that is designed to engage them. When we hear that a child is twice exceptional and struggling in the classroom, it's, oh, he doesn't have enough to do. He doesn't know, he has plenty to do. It is the work, it's not been tailored to engage the twice exceptional child's brain or engage them in learning, for them to be excited about learning, for them to be a wondered learner, meaning that they are wondering and exploring all of the aspects of the new learning. And so I think when we look at, again, accommodations, is what is a natural accommodation for a child? What happens? What do we do for a child who is twice exceptional? Usually families supplement for those children. Those are the children that people look at and always wonder, well, why are they in chess club? Why are they in Lego building this? Or why are they doing this? Because the school system necessarily does not equate the twice exceptionalness with needing challenging work versus more work.
I can kind of.
I'm so sorry. I just wanted to agree with her because I think that when we talk about adding on stuff like after school, we also need to think about the additional burden that puts on the family, like financially and logistically. When we send our kids to school, we want them to be safe and we want them to learn. And so as parents, if they're not getting that at school, and now we have this additional burden of, okay, well, what about that chess club after school? Or what about this Lego building camp on the weekends? And kind of more things are piled on top of us as parents. And also for kids, they're in school, 6 or 8 hours. And then, what are they doing during that time? And now we're saying, okay, after school, you also have these other things to look forward to. So it's just a lot that we're all trying to juggle.
I think I can speak to both of that. In the classroom, as a classroom teacher, thinking about how to make accommodations or have accommodations for all of the students in our classrooms. You're thinking about 25 kids. They all have some type of accommodation that they need, whether small or larger. And having that, one more thing to try to help them, that's where integrated comes in. And we found a way to, put these pathways of learning to meet those needs of those other students that might need the arts or the movement or the music in just a different way to access that content, so that you're enriching your students and you're helping those students that maybe have some other weaknesses. You're kind of building up that in your classroom, and you're tying it to the content that they need to understand.
And piggybacking off of that, just going into kind of going back to the question of accommodations versus modifications. As a classroom teacher, when I hear the term accommodations, I think of the tools and the resources necessary in order for students to be successful in learning maybe just grade level content, right? How can they access that information? And when I think of modification, I think of what do I need to do to alter what they need to learn? So maybe the grade level content is enough. So I need to modify my instruction to reach a higher level, or I need to modify my instruction to scaffold it lower. And so when we're talking about, accommodations versus modifications, it's kind of in the sense of, tools and resources versus how you're teaching and what you're teaching, if that makes sense.
In 2022-23, the number of students ages 3 to 21 who received special education and or related services under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, was 7.5 million, or 15% of all public school students. Latina Nicholson of the SOAR Educational Services has been an expert and advocate in this space. Latina, can we dispel the myth that accommodations are rare, shameful, or biased?
I don't think we are at the place. We would like it to be, but I don't think we are at the place where we can dispel that myth, because we have to deal with lots of things. Families first have to deal with the idea that their child needs help. Like, that alone is a mental kind of thing that parents have to deal with, and being okay with it. My child needs help, either having more if they're twice exceptional, and how do I help my child, or having some deficits, and how do I help my child. So that alone puts up barriers, because there becomes some sort of shame that is attached when your child needs help, because you have somehow created, not that this is true, not that I agree, but you have somehow created a child that is imperfect. And we see that and how it's communicated across the board. And what happens is, because there are epitaphs that go through the world that say everybody got to pull themselves up by their own bootstrap. Every tub need to stand on its own bottom. You know, those things imply that you should be a self-sufficient individual when you hit the ground. And so that alone is impossible. It also, we have to look at, and I don't think that we look at it enough, even though it's communicated and it's secret, there are systematic racism that happens in this place that also creates a barrier. And so when you are a person of color, the other piece to that is that there are these implicit biases that happen that assume that a person of color, a child of color, is either defective or they should have super strength. And so there's this gray space that makes it hard to dispel those kind of things about accommodations and support, because people are ashamed. They're ashamed, and that bias comes along in almost every place in the world. Like, it is, for a person of color, the idea is we don't want to have to tell somebody that I need help. And it is harmful when you don't want to ask for help, or that you live in denial about what needs to happen on the gifted end or on the non-gifted end.
I agree with that. And I think one thing that may help is that if all schools were just, or even places of employment were just more open and upfront as families are entering the school and saying, we're an inclusive school, we value all learning types, we want you to come to us if you have any concerns. And that's where you're, as a professional, opening the door and saying, come on in, I want to talk to you, you're welcome here. Instead of putting the pressure on the parent to say, like Latina was mentioning, my child has these struggles, and having that be attached to shame. And this way, it's the institution is saying, come to us, and we want to help you. And they're just being really open about that.
I don't know if ideally, because the law implies that anybody can request help. Let me just say that the law implies, there is a caveat in the law that says in child find that anyone, parent, teacher, community member, principal can ask for this service. It is implied as a public institution, thus public, that everybody is welcome. The problem I think that is not addressed is what I said earlier, is people come with implicit biases. If we like them or not, like if we agree or not, if people have their internal beliefs, teachers come with them, even well good intended, people come with them. And the easiest one, and it's easier, even if a child is twice exceptional, even though there's struggles, it is easier to have an understanding of twice exceptional students. Oh, they're just smart. And so we're going to add these smart things onto them. But we don't look at, yes, this child may be smart. And so the child is smart. And so the thought is, oh, well, they should have an understanding. Well, the child can be smart and have ADHD. And yes, I'm smart and I understand the concepts, but my ADHD has all of these things like object permanence, and my body may not be racing, but my brain is racing. Like they have all these other things. And so the assumption again is, oh, the child is smart. So why can't they understand this thing? Or why can't they just do it? And no, we tend to, especially for children, and I speak to children just because that's the population that I work with. Especially with children, we do things to children as opposed to include children as people. It is this response that children are just supposed to comply, and they're not supposed to have independent thought. They're not supposed to speak back, because if they speak back or question, then they're being disrespectful. Miss Colleen spoke about her child having PDA, and the idea of what PDA means and what that looks like. And we automatically assume that child is being rude and disrespectful in the space. And it's not that. It is that they have body autonomy and they understand body autonomy immediately versus what it looks like long term. And it's like, oh, no, you can't make me do these things because you decided. Or when you think of a child with autism who has difficulty with hierarchy, those children necessarily don't understand that you are an adult and I am not, and I should not speak to you that way. What they see is you're a person, I'm a person. You ask me a question, how can I ask you a question? You said something to me, why can't I say something to you? Like that is this kind of, and in most places as adults, those things are just natural because we have an understanding and we have grown to understand how that works. Children are still learning and children are still figuring out and navigating that. And we don't take that into consideration when we talk about accommodations, modifications, IEPs, 504s, what that looks like. It is like, oh, these children have deficits. Necessarily, those things are not deficits. As adults, we are happy for adults and people that can speak up for themselves. We tell children they should speak up and advocate for themselves, but we don't teach them that. And when we do, it's a problem.
I think I kind of want to speak on that, what you're saying. I think in the classroom, you're talking about, can they ask a question back and do the things? And in our classrooms, we embed those soft skills for our students. How do we collaborate with each other? How do we respectfully disagree? How do you just back and forth, open your mouth and say something nice? Just some of those things that we have to think about for our students. And yes, treating them as actual human beings in our classroom. How is it a safe environment for them to take risks, for them to try something new and fail forward?
I think too, kind of going off of what both Latina and what Meg said, coming from a excuse me, a classroom teacher perspective, it's kind of disheartening almost to hear how majority of educators get put into this bubble of, well, they only see the deficits and all that kind of space, because I truly believe there are educators such as ourselves that we don't see that. And, you were talking earlier about how, parents confronting the idea of, well, they're telling me now my child is imperfect. And truly to us, that's not true. Like we love these kiddos as our own, and all we're wanting them to do is succeed. And I think sometimes where that disconnect happens is with some of that legality stuff and, the paperwork and the wording and what has to happen in order for some of these services to happen. And so that's, we're here hoping to kind of change what this is looking like in education so that hopefully conversations like this in the future can take on, a different perspective, and hopefully, we can reach those parents, and our schools can, embody and have that feeling of inclusivity with all of the students and the parents walking in through our doors. And so one way that we're trying to bridge that gap between all of that's happening is open communication, of course, with everyone. And then, like Meg said, we're really just trying to change how content is instructed in the classroom, whether that's through multiple learning pathways, of embedding soft skills into lessons, and just making sure that we're differentiated so every student can access what we have successfully in their own way.
If a child is neurodivergent but performing well in the learning environment, would you afford that child the same reasonable accommodations available to a child not performing well in that environment? Is the child with accommodation in place allowed to surpass their peers in performance?
I don't know what well means. As an educated woman who has read lots of books and done lots of things and been what is well? Because well for me may not be well for the next person. And so we have to define well. And there is never a real definition, quantitative definition of what well means. And so I think to move forward in that, we need a kind of blanket definition, if you will, of what does well mean.
I would also.
I'm sorry. Kara, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say to go along with that as well. I agree. You kind of you need a more specific scale or some type of system in order to determine what does well mean. And then I guess when you say performance, my other question is what do you mean by performance? Are you talking academically, behaviorally, socially? What performance are you looking for? And is it overall? Are we looking at, certain aspects of that? So just to kind of piggyback off of that is just to make sure that we're being specific in those areas and what we're talking about.
Yeah, I totally agree. Asked that same question when I was looking through my notes of what does performing well mean? To me, and Kara just mentioned this too, is the child underperforming academically versus underperforming behaviorally. And I think from the academic perspective, I don't work in a school, but I imagine that's why kids are tested, right? Is to determine, are you at grade level? So we have maybe this expectation that you have a specific grade, and that will let us know whether you're falling within the average of what we're expecting within that bell curve. Typically, I imagine that a child who's underperforming academically, the teacher will notice. Certain steps will be taken to support that child, whether that is accommodations, right, an IEP. But then you have the flip side, you have a child who is underperforming behaviorally, and I think the approach is very different. So yes, the child is getting noticed from the teacher, and I would assume that that child's behavior is probably the biggest stressor for a teacher on a day-to-day, right? Is it a child who is dysregulated throughout the day, not just during math where they're falling behind in a particular subject, right? Their lagging social emotional skills is really permeating every part of their school day. But the reaction that, in my experience, is that child needs to leave the room. That child needs to go to the principal's office, the child needs to go home, the child needs to apologize. And so I think this kind of goes back to our question about shame, is when we continue with this approach of, well, your behaviors are disruptive, and it's telling this child that they're no good at what they may be trying really hard at. And it builds the cycle of shame starting really young, pre-K, kindergarten. You can't hang in this space where, you know, you need to be in this space because these are the skills that you need to practice in. You're not going to practice these social emotional skills that you're lagging behind in by sitting in a principal's office or by going home and being suspended, right? So I think that we need to really support these children who are struggling behaviorally and social emotionally, and having that really included in IEPs. I speak for my son, where he was finally accepted to go through the IEP process, and they went through it and they said he doesn't qualify because he is overperforming academically, and despite underperforming behaviorally, you know, he's at grade level, so he'll be fine. And I think that's something that really needs to change.
And I just want to add to that, add if you are a child of color. And I we don't add that enough to the conversation when we have these conversations. In spaces when you think about children of color and you think about special education services and having these services, the likelihood that this same child who is underperforming behaviorally based on whatever the standard is, they are assumed to be bad, and or then we're suspended. And if we get IEP services, those children are almost always looked at as what the standard is called in one of the 13 categories is EBD. And so it's emotional disturbance. And it very rarely, in my experience, are we looking at where are there other areas that could be creating this behavior. You know, being real honest, if you think about it from a perspective, and necessarily I've not taught in the classroom, but I've been in school systems, is that there is a child who's in the classroom and reading is the struggle. Well, I can't read. I don't understand what the teacher is saying, don't understand what they're asking me. And so as opposed to look like I can't do it, the answer is let me be the class clown. Let me do something else, because then I can distract from what it is that I am struggling with. And so I think we do need to look at across the board, even when I think of my twice exceptional child who has extreme anxiety. So it's not the idea that he cannot do the work. His anxiety kicks in, and it's am I going to do it well enough? Am I going to do these things correctly? Are they going to call on me? So that anxiety, he goes from 0 to 60. Then it created behaviors because I don't know. Am I going to do it in enough amount of time? Because things are timed. And, you know, there's been this whole situation, and we had to really have the school look at where is his real barrier.
Just kind of going back to, and I was just thinking about this as Latina was talking about her experience with her kiddo. When in the classroom, we are fortunate. I actually really enjoy, we grade and assess based upon academic standards. And so, you know, we have a set scale of what students, where they are performing, whether they are receiving, you know, accommodations or not, or wherever they are at the spectrum, it's what can they show us? And if, I think going back to the question, I think it was, you know, is that okay? Can they receive the same grade as if a student who wasn't? And in my opinion, that would be yes, because, you know, just because you're giving them the tools and the resources to be successful, they're still showing you what they know. They're still showing you what they are capable of doing. I think where some of that plays in is where she was talking about some of that behavioral aspect. And that's where it kind of gets a little murky, is because it's hard. Now, Meg and I, we have, you know, I feel like we use our multiple pathways of learning and we have super high student engagement. And so we're lessening those behaviors, those feelings of anxiety, because we're using those classroom learning experiences with that high engagement. And so we're involving all kids all the time. And so we have a little bit of an unfair advantage when it comes to our kiddos and being able to assess them in that way. But we're here to share that it's possible for every educator to do that and assess in that way. So that way all students, whether they're twice exceptional with accommodations and modifications, or just a typical gen ed student, we're here to share that everyone can be successful when implementing and using your instruction in a little bit different way.
I think it also comes down to, you think about these students that have different difficulties in the classroom, and they have anxiety about performing a certain way or maybe looking different based on the accommodation that they have. And in our classroom, the accommodations are so much a natural thing that's happening with these pathways and these different ways of learning through experiences, that they don't have to feel different or out of place or doing something that somebody else isn't doing. I have two sons that are dyslexic. So for them to access text looks a lot different than it would be for someone like myself that can just read a story and understand. So for one of my sons, he doesn't want to look different in the classroom. He wants to look like everyone else. He wants to participate. He wants to do those things. So having these different accommodations embedded into our instruction and how we're delivering that with these pathways and experiences, it allows Rylan, my son, to be able to feel included, and that anxiety goes away, but also be able to understand the content at his level.
Going along with that, talking about, because the original question had talked about, performing well and all of that kind of wording. And we oftentimes will use experiences as assessments. One, because you think of, test anxiety with our students, it is at like an all-time high. I was one of those as a kid. I never performed well on tests. However, my knowledge was, very great, but we're trying to give kids an authentic opportunity to show what they know, rather than being presented with, this daunting multiple page test, fill in the blank, multiple choice, or this daunting screen with all of these questions and having to answer. And so giving these kids authentic ways to show what they know and to how you worded it, perform, it gives us as educators such a more authentic way to see what they truly know and to authentically assess where they truly are at within their knowledge of the content and where they are at, like, socially and behaviorally.
I think I love that. And I love that idea that we are looking, that you guys are looking at in your design to say what children actually know. I would ask, and maybe you can elaborate in this segment or the next one, in how do we communicate that to parents? I think the other disconnect that happens is society, again, this idea of being well and what that means, and that grades are the marker necessarily of what we know and what we need to do. And I think it came to mind when you were talking, when I think about my other child who is level 2 autistic in the classroom, and I could care less about grades. I come from a time and place where grades could be altered if you participated in the can drive. So you could have a D, but you brought in cans for the can drive or for Thanksgiving, and you got 10 points. Now my D is a C. So I come from that time period, so I could care less about grades, and I'm always thinking about mastery of the concept. And the concept that I can think about as just having a third grader. We talked offline that you all are third grade teachers, and just having a kiddo that left third grade, one of the concepts is multiplication. Well, in our school system, they teach multiplication in 4 different ways and how you get to the answer. Well, in this kind of, you need to know all of the ways, and then they get to pick a way. Well, they have to teach all 4 ways first. Well, that did not work. And like, you cannot teach my autistic child 4 different ways to get to an answer for something and expect him to understand the concept. Because each one is different in his lane. And so we can't be looking for the same answer. And I just remember the teacher telling the teacher, I don't care if he doesn't know all of this. What we are looking for is, if he picks one and he gets the right answer, can he multiply? Like, can we master multiplication? And so I just remember having the conversation and us being very ecstatic that he ended the school year with a 68.7. Now, technically that's a D. However, that was his strong DA. Like, that was his A, because we knew that he mastered to his ability all of the concepts. And we knew that reason why it was that grade was not so much that he didn't master the concept of multiplication. It was because they were also grading him on all these other ways that took his grade down. And so I like the fact that it is about, what can you do? Can you master the concept? Do we understand what we're being asked and tasked to do? So I appreciate that as a model of teaching, and hopefully we can send that across to the universe.
What is the future of the classroom with all the accommodations for all who need it? Colleen, can you give us a parent's perspective about this shift and school and inclusion of virtual? And, when I went to school, it was just, go to school for first, second, third, fourth, fifth grade, go to high, and that's it. Now everything is just branching out. Colleen, give us some of your perspective.
Yeah, I'm happy to share a little bit of our story. My son is 7, and on Monday, he will be entering his 4th school in 4 years. Not because we've moved, we live in the same house. It's just because, as a twice exceptional learner, he's really struggled in all the various environments that he's tried. And we've kind of done a little bit. We've done public school, we've done private school, big school, smaller school. And there are a couple key things that have come to my attention as I learn more about him and learn more about the process and advocate for him. That first, when we kind of talk more about the private charter, even homeschooling or online learning, I live in the Bay Area. There's like 7 million people who live here. And when I search for twice exceptional schools, there's 2 that show up. So are there specialized schools out there? Yes, there's probably not as many as we would like, but I think we also need to ask about access and opportunity. We have a struggle, just like many families, where we're trying to look for the best fit school, and there are limitations, right? There's limitations based on where you live. Are these schools, available based on your zip code? Can we afford these schools? Do we need to move? What about our second child? What school does she go to? So there's a lot of questions and a lot of stressors that families go through as we're trying to make these decisions. So are those small schools and smaller opportunities available? Yes, but I think the majority of families are saying this is too hard and we can't make this work. So then I'm going to pivot and kind of go back to the more traditional learning environment, and that could be public or private. And so in my experience, when I think of traditional, I think of inflexible. That's the word that comes to mind, because I think of, again, I'm in San Francisco, like, people can talk a lot about, we integrate social emotional learning, and we have art and drama and all of these things starting from kindergarten. And we're like, great. But then you go in and it's like, this is our schedule. This is who teaches the class. This is how the content is taught. This is the way it's taught. This is the pace that it's taught. And there's just not enough flexibility for a child who needs an alternative way of learning. And so for me, when I think of how can traditional schools be better at supporting kids, I think flexibility comes to the very top for me. I think also about leading with curiosity. So Megan and Kara are advocating and teaching, educators how to lead with curiosity, how to ask the questions of how do we support these kids and how do we maybe think outside the box. And I think also parents need to lead with curiosity as well. There are certainly parents who maybe their child is getting identified as having needs a bit later, and maybe feeling like, well, no, that doesn't sound like my child. My child doesn't need extra help in this area. So I think if we all kind of really lead with, okay, how can we support this child? Why are these things happening in this learning environment? I think we can be more successful at supporting them. And the last thing I think about is collaboration. And as a parent who sat on the opposite side of the table of 3, 4, 5 educators, I can't help but think we are a group of adults making decisions for a child. And I really like the work of Dr. Ross Green, who came up with collaborative and proactive systems, where he really talks about bringing in the child, bringing up tough situations at school, obviously a day or two after things have passed and everyone's kind of calm and you're just really chill about it. And again, you're leading with curiosity and you're saying, hey, I understand that you don't want to do writing during literacy. Like, what's up with that? And trying to not shame the child, not tell them they're in trouble, but say, I see that you're struggling in this area and I want to help you. I will tell you that my first grader, I came home with his printed accommodation plan, and I just sat very casually on the couch a few days later, and I'm reading through it, I'm making notes in the margin, and he was like, what are you doing? And I told him, I was like, this is an accommodation plan that your school wrote up for you, and this, the goal is that if we tweak some things or add some things, that this will be a better learning environment for you and you could be happier and learn more. I was like, but your opinion matters, so would you like to read this with me and let me know what you think? And oh man, this child immediately, 2 or 3 things immediately, he was like, no, that doesn't work for me. I don't like that, right? Whether it's a specific word that could be triggering, especially for a PDA child, you say the word rules, oh no, you're done. Like, can we just like change that one word? Let's just like be creative and, find a synonym that's less triggering. Or it's something as specific as him saying, I don't like repeated verbal instruction. Okay, well, how do you prefer to get your instructions? I want to read them, or I want a demonstration. I think that we really need to, in order to make accommodation plans successful, we really need to bring in the child. And again, like, it was really informal with him and I in first grade, but it can start pretty young. And I think it depends on, obviously, the child and the family, but I do think that especially as they grow up, their perspective is really important. And by bringing them in, we're helping them build skills to self-advocate as they get older and older, as they get into the workforce, if they go on to university. I think that's a really important step that we should be adding.
I do think that we need to involve our children in the space. Again, that idea of what is happening to them, and let them speak up. I think I have a lot of thoughts around and I am trying to narrow them in. I have a lot of thoughts because I think about my own kiddo, who is twice exceptional, and what that looks like, and who also has a PDA profile and has anxiety. And when we involved him in what was happening, it changed how he participated in the classroom. So I do think we need to look at that. I think if I have to be real honest and think about it, I think where it starts is how we teach educators to be educators. I've been having a lot of conversations with teachers lately about how much of education they receive around special education services and around these particular learner profiles and around these particular neurodiverse concerns. And I find that most teachers tend to say, oh, well, we had a semester, or it may be have been a year in the regular education process. Unless a teacher is interested in special education services, that they get very little. Well, the problem with that is that the majority of our children start in general education, and then they are fanned out to these services. So you are saying that the general education teacher in that space is the person who is going to touch them first, but has the least experience. And I think that is the first step of problematic, and just kind of how teachers are educated, and making sure that we are looking at neurodiversity as a broad range of abilities and not deficits. Because we have talked about here several times, children are neurodiverse, but they're twice exceptional and they're highly intelligent. So that doesn't necessarily mean because I'm neurodiverse, I am less than, or I don't have the ability. And so I think that is an area that we don't necessarily look at in this complex system, and having conversations around these type of learning environments. I don't think we look at how how teachers are educated, and we talk less about the systematic racism. We talk less about parenting concerns, and we talk less about the diversity of the classroom and what comes into the space to have real meaningful change in this area.
I'm going to add to that. So I agree. As well, when I was in college and teaching, that which was 15 years ago, but we got a very small piece of special education services and what that looks like. But I think what it comes down to is the collaboration piece. You know, we have to collaborate as educators. We have to bring our adults together at that table and have that conversation, because you know, we have 25, 30 kids walking into our classrooms. And for me to know everything that's out there and to be able to make that make sense in my general education classroom it would be too much on a teacher. And so I think that's why you bring in other experts. You have that collaboration between you and your special education teacher, between you and your speech teacher, APE, OT, whatever that might be, or your team. You know, two heads are always better than one. So I think that collaboration piece is extremely important. And we always have to evolve in our education. We always have to move forward and bring in different ideas and new ideas in our classroom to meet the needs of our students, because you're right, we are teaching our future. And what does that look like for them? And the only thing that we can do is give them all the tools and the resources that we know best for them.
I'm going to kind of piggyback on what Colleen had said a little bit earlier about, you know, going into a school and the things that she has seen, you know, with the inflexibility and, you know, again, going back to what Meg and Latina were saying, like the collaboration pieces and all of that. And I think in education, we always say the best intervention is, you know, your tier one, which is like your, you know, your whole class, your, you know, basic, your main instruction piece for all of your kids. And so I feel like, you know, what we're trying to do is we're trying to, you know, reach teachers so that way their tier one is hitting all of those students' needs before we ever need to, you know, go further into the specialized services for those students. You know, we're wanting to give our students the best foot forward. And so like Colleen was saying, is we're trying to show educators that you can still be flexible, even when you are given, you know, we need to, you know, teach this curriculum, this content, whatever that might be. There is a way for you to still be flexible and meet those needs of those students, as well as still communicating and collaborating with those parents. So that way you have a better understanding of the learner. And honestly, like she said, the students themselves. We implement experiences the first weeks of school because they tell us, how do these students learn best? How are they interacting socially? What content or what background knowledge are they already coming with? And so, within the first week of school, we already have a good, kind of profile on these students, just as a gen ed teacher, kind of making all these notes. So that way we can move a little bit, in a positive direction with our students, and hopefully opening that flexibility piece and that collaboration piece with our teams and our parents. So that way we're creating a positive learning experience and a learning environment for our kids, rather than one that's, structured, like inflexible and rigid, and a place where they just don't feel comfortable, because as an educator, that's never what I want for my kids. I want my classroom to be a safe place and a place where they want to come see me every single day.
And let me say, I wanted to say it's not 80% of my experience, and as an advocate and a parent, it's usually not the teacher. It is usually not the teacher that is in the classroom with the student. It is what I will cautiously call the powers that be. That make this more difficult and trying than it should be. It is usually not the teachers. Very rarely in my experience that have I worked with teachers who are really real inflexible. I mean, there are some, those teachers that feel like I've been teaching for 35 years and we did it this way. That are very inflexible. The teachers usually are not the ones that are inflexible. It is the powers that be. It is the idea that somebody somewhere made a decision that the school is going to do it this way. Somebody somewhere made a decision that this is the only curriculum that we can have. Somebody somewhere made a decision that we can't step outside of this particular square. That idea we have to all color in the same lines. And we all have to color the cow brown. It's like those kind of ideas, and someone somewhere made that decision in a world that Stephen has talked about that is advancing. Nowhere would I have thought in my education when I was growing up that literally in real time that I could also be learning the same thing as a child would be learning in Japan. Like that would have those kind of experience in my education were in a long thing ago, encyclopedias. Those kinds of things were not at my fingertips. It was the encyclopedias. We had to go to the library and understand the Dewey Decimal System. And if you ask children today kind of what that means, they're like, huh? No, you just type in and look in a book. We didn't have Google Scholarly like that. I have access to research from around the world that was not at my fingertips. And so because these children have this access, the powers that be that are looking at education should also recognize that these children have this access, and how do we tap into those resources as well and be flexible in that way.
Latina, I want to, sorry for clarifying. I agree with you that all of my son's teachers have been exceptional, and that really, you called it the powers to be, the head of school, whatever the structure is the thing that's inflexible. I can say from my perspective, there's nothing more heartbreaking than having a conversation with your child's teacher and the teacher saying, your son would really benefit from this thing. And you saying, great, can we do that? And then they say, no, we can't. And I've gotten several lists of, well, your child would do great with like a third recess. He really needs a third recess. Great, can we do that? No, we can't. That's, to me, in my experience, really heartbreaking, is to be with the teacher in the space, have them know and understand your child, and then have the rigidity coming from the actual system where the teacher can't actually do what will actually help this child.
I think it comes down to with educators that, we're given this curriculum, we're given this schedule, this way that it's supposed to be easier. I don't know. And it comes down to that we just have to take what we have and maybe look at it differently. We do have to color outside the lines sometimes, and maybe the cow is actually purple, and that's okay. Just kind of thinking outside of the box, but yet still staying in the parameters of education. We're given certain standards and curriculum to use, but I think where Kara and I are different in that our day is not, this is math time, this is reading time, this is this time, because that's where behaviors start. Is immediately when you think of math time and your student is struggling with that piece of the day, that's when behaviors go crazy, because that's their anxiety piece. So if we look at our instruction a little bit different and we kind of think differently of what we have at our fingertips, that's where we can start meeting the needs of all of our students.
Excellent. Well said. And as expected, we are moving out of the realm of what we typically think of accommodations into what might be considered inclusive education. Let's talk about some of the methods of teaching that consider the range of learning styles, adjusting as the needs present, without an interruption to the classroom flow. If that seems like a dream, Integrate Ed has been working on exactly that. Meg and Kara, can you shed some light?
Go for it, Kara.
All right. Yeah, that's exactly what we have been working on. We are still in the classroom, but we also are educational speakers as well. And one thing that we have, developed and we train educators on is something we call the multiple pathways of learning. And, everyone learns something differently as, adults, and it stems down to our children. And a lot of times we need to just take a step back and see what pathway do they need in order to access the content and to be successful in the classroom. And so part of our work is showing educators how, adding things such as, maybe a pathway is technology, and I have a whole soapbox on technology, so I won't go into that, but purposeful technology, storytelling, music, visual arts. I know I'm forgetting a couple, but the premise is integrating those or implementing those into how we instruct our students. I was a kiddo who I grew up in the era of it was, sit and get and lecture all of the time. And you think now, especially in the secondary ed, that's still a lot of how instruction is given. But 90% of those students are not auditory learners. They need to be involved with the instruction in a different way. And so we are trying to show educators how that is possible with the curriculum or the standards that you need to teach. And so we're starting, we talk to all levels. Of course, we're, living in the elementary world, but we also speak to those higher ed teachers because your learning pathway, it doesn't matter whether you're 6 or 16, you still have pathways of learning that can be put into instruction for kids to be successful. We also talk about giving students, showing them different pathways of learning, because as they grow and as they change, their pathway might alter as well. And so just to constantly be implementing these different learning pathways into instruction to ensure kids can access it and be successful at any given time. With implementing these pathways, we do a lot with classroom learning experiences. And with those classroom learning experiences, you're giving kiddos just hands-on real life learning. You are also providing them with bridging, we say experiences bridge the gap between, textbook and real life. And we experiences bridge the gap between abstract and concrete. So many of these kiddos, so many of the concepts we're trying to teach them, they're so abstract, they don't make any sense. And so we create experiences and put in learning pathways to make them make sense and make them concrete for our kiddos so that way they can be successful. And with that talk of accommodations and modifications, when we put in these learning pathways and experiences into our instruction, we are naturally differentiating for our students right away. Because when kiddos are involved in these experiences, it also frees us up as an educator to be able to move around and guide students in different ways, whether they need a little bit more one-on-one, whether maybe they just need some guiding questions, maybe they need a few more tools or resources, whatever that might look like. It frees us up to then just be a guide for their instruction rather than the lecturer at the front of the room who is not necessarily maybe giving them access to the content that they need. And so that's where we come in with the multiple learning pathways and classroom learning experiences in the instruction.
I think when Kara talks about all of these things, like what does that look like in our classroom? And that's where we go around the nation. We speak to other educators and other schools, universities about how can we change the traditional approach in the classroom for a more positive way? How can we move forward as educators to help our students? I have 4 kids, one of them being in high school all the way down to 1st grade. And what really struck me one night was at dinner, and my high school student was not excited to go back to school. It was boring. He wasn't excited. My now junior high student, school stresses him out because sometimes it's not accessible to him, and fear of missing a question or messing up or not doing it right. And I think that's what drives our passion is we want to help our students the best that we can, and we want them to be excited to come back to school tomorrow. We want them to be able to learn in a way that makes sense for them and excites them by giving those experiences, those hands-on, so that when they are in their adult years, they can look back and have that content because we provided it in a way for them that makes more sense, and that it's more accessible to them. So we are on this movement of changing the classroom, of changing that traditional approach of how we instruct. And the more people that we can talk to and help out, the more we feel that impact. So.
And we want to clarify, we are not a curriculum. We are not, trying to encourage like do this on day 1, do this on day 2. First of all, we've been there. We know what that feels like. And what we're trying to do is show educators and schools how you can take what you have, but use it in a different way to truly make impact on these students. We're not wanting you to spend millions of dollars on a new curriculum. I know a lot of, places that's what they're trying to push. However, we're trying to tell you that you can use what you have, but we just need to look at it in a little bit different way. We just need to take the traditional teaching approach and, modify it and change our instruction in order to best meet the needs of these kiddos. What we needed to learn and what our world looked like when we were students is not the same as what our students are experiencing today and what they're going to be experiencing in the future. So we have to make sure that we're being flexible in our approaches. And so that is what we're trying to show educators is we're not a curriculum. We are just simply, showing you, training you on how you can use it differently.
I think that what you guys are providing sounds incredible. I have a deep respect for teachers. My son's kindergarten teacher, I think just had this really natural gift of, I'm kind of going back to thinking about modifications and accommodations, but in their kindergarten class, it was just her, 22 kids. And I know that she kind of seamlessly, organically gave him things at his level, just kind of it's not a big deal. I'm not, and he did well in the classroom in that environment because she was flexible, that she understood him. And I will say that I volunteered one time for like an art project there to help with the kids for an hour and 15 minutes. And I can tell you, after I was done, I had to go home and lay down in the living room floor. I was like, I don't know how you guys do this. I'm exhausted. But just to be there for an hour and 15 minutes, and to watch her walk around the room, you know, make time just even for like a gentle check-in with the child. Like, it's truly a gift to watch this person in this space. And I think what you guys are doing is incredible. And I hope that you can reach out to more and more folks with what you're providing.
And those are those things that, as Colleen mentioned, that based on what they're providing, I think some of those things are also those like natural teacher accommodations. Like when you, like, teachers do things that when you ask them to document it, on my end as an IEP advocate, I am always asking teachers to document this thing that you do that makes the child successful. And they're always like, huh, what? Because it is the natural part of their teaching. And I am trying to capture it for the child. So when that IEP goes to the next grade, because it may not be a natural part of the next teacher's teaching practice, she can understand. It's like, hey, this works. And so I'm excited with that, because you are taking those natural teaching practices and helping teachers, all of them, recognize that these are the tools that could be helpful and the things that you already have to help those students. So I think I'm excited with Colleen. That makes me very excited.
Excellent. Panel, this is an honor and a privilege to host the Dean Talks. And while we have you all here, I wanted to see if we can get a quick case study review. So let's get started. Brad is a single dad. He has custody of his 3 kids and works hard to make sure they are provided for. His middle son, Jarius, gets mixed reports from school. He can't understand why Jarius doesn't perform well like his siblings, especially since he knows the meaning of hard work from his dad. Yesterday, a letter came saying Jarius might need special support and an individual education plan. He doesn't believe there is anything that is wrong with his son. He's wondering what the school can do to help and if he should leave the concern in the power of the school to get his son on the right track. Panel, do you have any suggestions for Brad?
So when I read this case study, the thing that popped up to me that I highlighted was that Jarius knows the meaning of hard work and that he's learned it from his dad, so that we know that this is an integral part of the family's values. But as a parent of a twice exceptional child, what others may not understand is that these children are working really hard, sometimes in areas that we take for granted. So with twice exceptional kids, hard things are easy and easy things are hard. And I think that if I were to sit down and talk to Brad, I would again ask him to just lead with curiosity, that even though Jarius knows the meaning of hard work, is he trying super, super hard, but we're just not understanding that he's putting forth all of this effort, it's exhausting to him, and he needs support so that he doesn't have to work as hard, that we're taking a strengths-based approach to help him succeed in this environment.
What stands out for me in that, and when I read this case study, I would ask a couple of questions. My first question, when the idea that Jarius understands the meaning of hard work, and I would ask what that looks like. How do you know he understands that? Just because he watched you, or have you taught him that? Like, that would be the first question, so we could have an understanding of what it is. And then I would ask to see, as an advocate, if this was my client, I would ask, are there patterns? Do you see when you get these notes, does it happen at the same time? Is it in the same space? Is it with the same teacher? Is it in the same subject? So that we can look at what's happening in that space, that we get these notes sometimes in that space. And then I would start from there. I think those two things are extremely important, just because it goes back to understanding the meaning of hard work, goes back to our conversation about well, and what you believe he understands about hard work versus what he understands about hard work could be very different, because he inevitably is probably working very hard. And so where does that standard lie for that? And I would look for patterns, because then we could see if they recommended that he possibly needs support, and we are drilling down to exactly where we need support, because sometimes students do not need support in all areas. There could be something specific, and we could look at that first.
Kind of bridging what Colleen and Latina were saying is, looking for patterns and, clarifying that hard work piece. Coming from the educator's perspective, I'm thinking, how has the content been instructed? In what way are you giving this student or this child a way to access the information? And also, how are you giving them a way to show what they know with this information? So kind of bridging, both what Latina said, because I feel like finding those patterns is going to be a huge piece. And then, that definition of hard work and what that means to not only you, but your student, bridging that as from an educator's perspective of how are you instructing, have you found one way that's more successful than the other, or has it been the same from the get and he hasn't been able to access a different pathway, therefore show you what he can actually do. And then, going through that process, you'll be able to get a little bit more specific information from him as a learner, and then therefore provide more specific information for the parents and then the team surrounding those decisions.
I would also like to, as I was talking to Brad, just acknowledge that having these conversations, learning about your child, that they're struggling in school, is really disheartening. And it sounds like this is the first time he's going through this. He has, 2 other kids. This can be really surprising. He could have all these different feelings about it. In my experience, I would love somehow, I don't know how it would work, but for schools to allow parents who are in the same situation to connect, because it's kind of like free therapy, honestly. Like when we get to talk to each other, we feel like we're not alone. And when we're sitting at that table as a parent and we have, all these educators on the other side of us, we often feel alone, and we're not specialists. Like I'm not here on the panel as a specialist, right? I'm just here saying like, this is my experience. So I think that there's a lot of power within community, and if we can connect parents together, that I think that we can really boost each other up and support each other and say, you know what, like this is my experience. You're not going through this alone. We'll figure it out. I think it's really important.
I will say, Colleen, that is wholeheartedly one of the tenets that I build my practice on. One of the things that makes me successful as an advocate when parents come to me, my special education story and how I transitioned into being an advocate is I had a kiddo who had a classic presentation of autism. When we went to school at 3, I had a school psychologist look me in my face and tell me that he would never learn. And from my previous career, as a person who was developing after school programs with educational institutions and spending millions of dollars in these programs, these people would have been my colleagues. And the one thing that I knew, that was the nature of children. The nature of children is to learn. Like that's kind of their whole makeup, is to learn new stuff. And so I knew that. And so that kind of community, it literally is how I build my practice. And one of the things that makes me successful as an advocate is that my families know that I understand what has been said to them, where you are not by yourself. And there are other people that have gone through this, and we can get on the other side and see results if we do some steps.
Now, quickly, let's go through what each one of you are doing, how people can get in touch with you, and then we will put a button on this session of the Dean Talks. Let's go ahead and start with Latina.
I am, again, like I said earlier, we talked about, I serve families virtually nationwide. I am currently in 6 or 7 states, and I am helping my families get a good start on the beginning of the school year and making sure that they are in collaboration with their current teachers. And so I'm just moseying along.
Okay. And contact information is available for all of our panelists at ripefruit.org. But how would someone get in touch with you, Latina?
They could go to my website, which is SOAR Educational, the SOAR EDU services.com. That's SOAR EDU services.com. Go directly to the contact page and reach out, and I will follow up.
Excellent. And how about you, Kara?
Yeah, so Meg and I, we are both, of course, like we had said earlier, we're still in the classroom. However, we are also educational speakers. We speak all across the country, as small as individual grade level teams to buildings to districts, on just those learning pathways and classroom learning experiences and how to use what we have in a different way. And so, you know, when we're not in the classroom, we're traveling and speaking. And if there is any downtime, of course, we have our families at home. So we are just really excited about that work that we are doing. We do in-person PDs. We also have a virtual cohort as well, where we meet once a month and we are able to provide training for teachers in that way as well. We are all over social media, Instagram, Facebook, X, LinkedIn. We also have a YouTube channel page. And we're all at, it's called Integrated K-12. Those are our handles. And our website is integratedk12.com. So if you are interested in anything that we have, that is where we are at. And yeah.
If you go to our website right now at integratedk12.com, you can put in your email and get a free CLE Classroom Learning Experiences ebook that can help you start embedding those experiences in the first months of your school days and those pathways. So our To Teach or Not to Teach YouTube channel that Kara was talking about is all around not necessarily to stay in the classroom or to leave, but how are you using your instruction currently in your classroom to best meet your students?
Okay, this was such a great conversation. I know we're at time, so I won't hold you, but I just want to let you all know the ideas that came out of what you created, co-created in this session, which is really the purpose of what we're doing here. Latina talked about natural accommodations. I thought, what if there was a symptom to accommodation widget? You put the symptoms in and some natural accommodations show up. You created that. Importance of community. You and Colleen touched on that multiple times. So if there was one overall, app or creation that came from this, it would be that. But parents could even have response scripts where someone tells them something like your child will never learn, and they could kind of let this thing tell them how can they respond to that, right? Object permanence. What if there was a game to help kids understand just, they can put it in this app as a picture, and just because they don't see it anymore, it's sort of a like reminder that this thing exists, and they can play around with the thing disappearing and coming back, but it still exists. These are like to strengthen those muscles. So you have a whole list. I'll send it to you. Integrated K-12, you created and kind of landed on, besides the apps for the techniques you already have in there, this idea around collaboration brain. So group chats, a perpetual chat for parents, IEP, previous teachers that maybe travels with the child. Maybe you also talked about community support for the newly diagnosed, which would go with the other app. You talked about your pathways, your multiple learning pathways. What if there was a GPS pathways app that kind of would help the student understand where there was a detour, help the student and the parent? It was this sort of GPS, sort of gamifying that. An excitement meter, I think Kara touched on. I can't remember who talked about like the excitement of the child, kind of gauging where the excitement is. And that way it opens up a new conversation between that student and the parent. Not excited about I get to wear my new clothes, but how are they responding to the teachers in the schools and the peers there? Colleen talked about some apps came from, some wonderful ideas came from your conversation as well. So this idea of a calculator, or education navigation specialist. You're moving to a new area. You have one kid that's twice exceptional, one kid that's, has, maybe a visual impairment, and another kid that might be showing up as a typical gen ed student. How could you put that in the formula and gauge it against the schools in the area and come out with some recommendations? Also, like this word scrambler, it's like a neurodiversity friendly translator. You want to use a word that's limiting and lacking, but you don't have time to figure out what that is, so that it doesn't bruise the kid and bruise the parent. Maybe there's an AI-powered sort of word scrambler. So you have a whole list as well. All three of you do. I'll send them all to you. This has been a great conversation. So just grateful to have you all here and to be a part of the conversation and to begin this relationship with you. So thanks for joining. I'm going to turn it back over to Steve.
Okay, thank you, Ebony. Ebony buttoned this up. Ebony also opened this up. So once again, thank you, Ebony Kinney. My name is Stephen King. You have just listened to the Dean Talks, and more information about our speakers as well as our prior Dean Talk episodes are available at ripefruit.org. That's ripefruit.org. My name is Stephen King. Thank you, panelists, very much for this session. Have a wonderful day and a better tomorrow. Remember, these kids are our future. Bye-bye.